Hello. These are true horror stories from people who actually lived them. Abandoned houses, strange sounds, moments you'll never forget. Brave enough? Subscribe, hit the bell, and let's begin. This story takes place in a remote area of the UK, but to protect the people involved, I won't say the exact location. My friend Zara, a British Pakistani influencer, had just recently had her second child, and her husband had gone away on a golf holiday, leaving her alone with the two children. She was used to being left alone, as her husband often worked away from home and would often go on vacation with his friends, leaving her alone to take care of the children. It was a stormy October night, and there was a lot of thunder, so it was noisy. She started to feel uncomfortable as it was getting dark early, and her house is fairly isolated, so all the noise from outside was reaching her. At around 9 p.m., she had just finished a cup of coffee in the kitchen. The children were asleep, and Zara was making sure the house was locked up for the night. She went back into the kitchen and saw that the back door was slightly open. She started to approach it, but then felt very dizzy, stumbling, and she fainted. Zara slowly regained consciousness and sat on a chair in the kitchen. The first thing she was aware of was how heavily she was breathing through her nose. She felt something covering her mouth, and after twisting her lips, she realized it was duct tape sealing them. Zara started to panic and tried to talk and shout, but the gag around her mouth prevented her. She struggled to move as well as feel her hands taped together behind the chair. When she looked down, she was taped to the chair and her feet were taped together. Her labored breathing caused the duct tape covering her mouth to pop in and out. Then the lamp over her head switched on. Standing before her was a medium-built man with a hood and a scarf covering his lower face. At this point, Zara was obviously petrified and mainly concerned for her two children sleeping upstairs. The man then said, "I won't hurt you, but do you keep money in the house?" Zara mumbled no. Against the tape asterisk, the man had a large bag, which he had filled with items such as Dubai jewelry. From around the house. The next thing he said sent a chill up Zara's back. "Don't worry, your kids are still asleep." He then went to leave through the back kitchen door, and before exiting turned and said, "I'm sorry for this." He then left the house, leaving Zara tied up and gagged. Zara struggled with her bonds, grunting heavily through her gag on her mouth for a few minutes, and then eventually freed her mouth from the duct tape by twisting her mouth and biting the tape. She managed to twist her hands out of the tape, holding her wrists. She immediately ran to check on her children, who had both slept through the entire ordeal. She phoned the police, and the man was eventually apprehended later that week. As mentioned, Zara has an online presence, so the man was aware of this and knew she was often left alone. He admitted to gaining access to the back door and drugging her coffee, which explains why she fainted. The burglar said he had lost his business and was in a desperate situation with the state of the economy. But he did not wish to harm Zara, bears a resemblance to Kim Kardashian, and the fact she is a micro-influencer is likely what gave him this idea, as a similar situation happened with Kim Kardashian a few years earlier. Zara is a very strong, feisty young woman, so she did eventually learn to live with the situation. However, it's not something you can ever fully recover from. She couldn't help feeling sorry for the man who did this, but the feeling she had when she was gagged and helpless in that chair is something she'll never forget. The night someone slipped into our home. There are nights you forget the moment they end, and there are nights that stay with you forever, replaying in your mind like a film you can't escape. What happened to us recently is one of those nights, one that left a scar on our sense of safety, a night we still feel, even now, 15 days later. We had gone out to attend a family wedding. It was supposed to be a joyful night, full of music, lights, and laughter. Before we left, I checked every door and every window carefully, especially one small window in the corner of the house, so tiny and tightly sealed that even a child couldn't squeeze through it. I remember closing it with my own hands. I remember locking it. I remember telling my wife, "Now the house is completely safe." I didn't know then how wrong I was. At the wedding, everything felt normal. People dancing, children running around, women chatting, men taking photos. But there was one detail that I only understood later. A man stood near the exit, not talking to anyone, not participating in anything. His eyes weren't on the bride or groom. They were on us. He watched us in a way that made me uncomfortable, but I tried to ignore it. Sometimes your instincts scream, and you silence them. That was my mistake. When we left the wedding hall and got in our car, I had a strange feeling. And shortly after we started driving, I saw headlights behind us. A car following slowly, matching our speed, keeping the same distance, as if trying not to be noticed. At first, I told myself it was nothing, just another driver heading home. But every turn we took, it followed. Every road we switched to, it stayed behind. I felt something cold crawling up my spine, but again, I chose to ignore it. I shouldn't have. When we reached our home, everything felt wrong the moment I stepped out of the car. The air was heavy. The house was glowing with light from the inside, although we had left it completely dark. The front door was slightly open, moving gently with the wind. There was no sound, no movement, just a strange, unnatural stillness that made my heart begin to pound. I walked inside slowly, with my wife right behind me. What we saw felt like a punch to the chest. Our living room was turned upside down, drawers wide open, papers thrown across the floor, blankets ripped off the couch. It looked like someone had searched the house in complete silence, yet with terrifying precision. My wife ran toward the bedroom, and when I followed her, I found her frozen in front of the open wardrobe. Her jewelry box was lying on its side, emptied completely. Every piece of jewelry she owned, gold, silver, diamonds, everything she had collected over the years was gone. But the true horror wasn't the missing jewelry. It was the window. That same tiny window I had locked myself was wide open. A window barely 20 centimeters wide. A window so narrow that even a small child couldn't crawl through it. And yet, someone had slipped inside. Someone had managed to push their body through that impossible space without breaking it, without damaging it, without leaving a single sign of struggle. How can a person pass through something so small? Who was flexible enough, or desperate enough to do it? At that moment, the realization hit me like ice water. The man who followed us from the wedding wasn't alone. He wasn't the thief. He was only there to make sure we stayed away long enough, while the other one entered through that tiny window and tore our home apart. I immediately called the police, trembling with anger and fear. But their response was the last thing I expected. They told us not to touch anything and that they would come in the morning. The morning. Not now. Not immediately. Not while the thief might still be nearby, watching us, laughing at how helpless we were. That night was the longest night of our lives. We didn't sleep at all. Every sound made us jump. Every shadow on the wall felt like someone hiding behind a door. My wife cried until her voice broke, not only because of the loss, but because of the feeling that someone had been inside our home, touching our things, moving through our rooms, entering our private world like a ghost. When morning finally came, the police arrived. They searched, photographed, examined every corner, and found nothing. No fingerprints, no footprints, no tools, no evidence, nothing at all. The thief wore gloves. The thief wore a mask. The thief knew exactly where to look, what to take, and how to disappear without leaving a trace. As if he had done this many times before. As if he had been watching our house for days. Maybe weeks. 15. Days have passed since that night. 15. Days of locking every door twice. 15. Days of checking every window. Again and again. 15 days of hearing. Footsteps in the silence. Even when there are none. 15 days of waking up at the smallest sound. We installed cameras. Alarms, metal bars. We reinforced the doors and windows. Even the tiny one. But the fear remains. Because once someone breaks into your house, your mind never forgets the sound of that violation. Sometimes, late at night, I look at that small window, and I wonder how a person could squeeze through something so narrow. I wonder how long he was in our home. I wonder if he is still watching us. And the worst part is knowing that whoever did this is still out there, hidden, silent, waiting, and we may never know when he'll decide to return. Just when we thought things couldn't get any worse, today proved us wrong. This morning, while I was tightening a new lock on our back door, I heard voices outside, worried, shaky, and coming from the house next door. At first, I ignored it, thinking it was just casual conversation. But then I heard my neighbor's wife sobbing loudly, the same way my wife cried the night our home was violated. I walked outside, and before I even reached their driveway, I knew exactly what had happened. Our neighbor looked pale, exhausted, completely drained. The moment he saw me, he said words that froze my blood. They broke into our house last night. His voice trembled. His hands were shaking. His eyes were empty, exactly like mine 15 days ago. He explained that they had gone out for dinner the previous evening. Nothing long, nothing unusual. Just a simple night out. When they returned, something felt off. The garage door wasn't fully closed. The hallway lights were turned on, and the kitchen window, another small, tight window, had been opened from the inside. His wife fainted when she saw their bedroom. All her jewelry, hidden cash, sentimental pieces, gone. The thief or thieves had moved through their home with the same eerie silence and precision we experienced. No broken locks. No shattered glass. No evidence of forced entry. Just the same unsettling signs that someone had slipped in and out like smoke. The part that disturbed me the most was when the neighbor said this. The officer told me something. He thinks it's the same person who broke into your house. The same person. The same method. The same surgical accuracy. The police believed the thief was still in the area. Maybe watching the neighborhood. Maybe studying each house one by one. Maybe waiting for the right moment to strike again. When my neighbor said that, a cold realization hit me. This wasn't random. This wasn't coincidence. This was a pattern, like someone mapping the neighborhood, testing every weak point, learning our routines, our habits, our blind spots. My neighbor's story mirrored ours so closely that it felt like reliving the nightmare again. But there was something new. Something worse. He told me that the thief left one thing behind this time. Small piece of black fabric caught on the window latch. Police believed it came from a tactical shirt. The kind worn by someone experienced, someone organized, someone who knows exactly what they're doing. As I walked back to my house, I felt eyes on me. Not from a person I could see, but from somewhere hidden, somewhere close. The idea that the thief was nearby, possibly watching from a car, a rooftop, or even an abandoned property, felt like a weight on my chest. For the first time since our break-in, I realized something terrifying. It wasn't over. It had just begun. And now, we weren't the only victims anymore. That night, after the police left, and the house finally went quiet. Sleep refused to come anywhere near us. Every sound felt heavier. Every shadow looked deeper. My wife sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the door as if expecting someone to twist the handle at any second. Just before dawn, we heard a knock on the door. Slow, hesitant, almost trembling. When I opened it, our neighbor stood there pale, sweating, and shaking so badly he could barely speak. His eyes were bloodshot, as if he hadn't slept in days. He finally managed to whisper, "They broke into my house last night." Those words made my stomach drop. We invited him inside immediately, and he sat on the couch, holding his head in his hands. He looked traumatized, almost as if he had seen something more than just a common thief. He explained that he and his family were at a wedding too, just like us. When they returned after midnight, they found the same scene we did: lights on, doors wide open, drawers torn apart, jewelry gone, electronics missing, money vanished. But there was something worse. He said he heard footsteps inside the house when he arrived. The thieves were still there, as soon as he opened the door. He heard someone running upstairs. He rushed after the sound, but the house fell silent again. No movement, no breathing, nothing. It was as if whatever was inside had simply melted into the darkness. He searched every room, every corner, even the attic. Nothing. But when he walked back to the living room, the front door was wide open again, like someone had stood behind him the entire time, watching. He told us the police came in the morning. Same story as ours: no fingerprints, no footprints, no signs of forced entry. The windows were sealed, the doors locked. It looked impossible. The officers gave in the same empty promise they gave us. What unsettled us more was what he said next. He had cameras. Real, high-quality security cameras installed all around his house. But when he checked the footage, everything from that night was corrupted. Every file was black, like someone had erased the entire night, second by second, leaving only static and a faint sound in the background breathing. Slow, heavy, almost animal dash, like my wife grabbed my arm when he said this. Her face turned white, because just yesterday, we tried checking our own cameras too, and they were also corrupted. The same static, the same black frames, the same breathing sound echoing behind the static. The more we talked, the clearer it became. Whatever or whoever entered our homes wasn't just a normal thief. They knew how to avoid cameras, how to get in through sealed windows, how to leave no trace behind. And now we knew they weren't targeting one house. They were watching the whole neighborhood, and they weren't done. Our neighbor told us that at around 3 in the morning, when he finally fell asleep out of exhaustion, he woke up suddenly, feeling like someone was standing right beside his bed. He swore he heard whispering, not words, just breathing. Slow, deep, right next to his ear. When he turned on the lights, no one was there, but there were wet footprints leading out of his bedroom and into the hallway. Footprints too small for a man, too narrow for a woman, too strange to belong to anyone he knew. He hadn't told the police this part. He hadn't told his wife or kids. He only told us because he felt we were living the same nightmare. But by the time he finished talking, the sun had already risen. The neighborhood looked calm, peaceful, almost normal. But we all knew it wasn't normal. Something was happening here. Something more than break-ins. Something that erased itself from cameras, slipped through sealed windows, and moved silently through locked houses. And the worst part? We realized we weren't just victims. We were being observed. The story was no longer about what happened. It was about what was coming next. In a remote, scarcely populated corner of one of the northern American states, where the roads wind through endless forests and rolling hills, lived a man named Henry with his family. The farmhouse they called home was modest but warm, surrounded by sprawling fields, wooden fences, and a small herd of cows and goats. Life there was simple, quiet, and steady a rhythm, dictated by the rising sun, the changing seasons, and the needs of the animals. For Henry, tending the land and caring for his family had always been enough. It was predictable, safe, and fulfilling. Or so he thought that the move to this more secluded property had been recent. Henry had wanted privacy, away from neighbors and prying eyes. He wanted his children to grow up in a place where the wind whispered through the trees, where mornings smelled of wet earth and hay, and nights were filled with the chorus of frogs and owls. It was idyllic, peaceful, a dream come true. Until the night the storm came. The rain began in the early evening, soft at first, a gentle patter on the roof and the windows. But by nightfall it turned into a downpour, relentless, a curtain of water that lashed against the farmhouse with a power that made every wooden board groan. The wind whistled through the gaps in the eaves and shook the old trees outside, bending their branches as if they were boughs. Inside, Henry's family huddled together, listening to the storm. The children, tucked under blankets, were fascinated by the thunder, pointing to flashes of lightning that lit the room in stark, fleeting brightness. Henry's wife tried to calm their youngest, who whimpered at every rumble. Despite the storm, Henry felt a strange sense of security. After all, the farmhouse had stood for generations. The fences were strong, the gates locked, and the barn was solid. His livestock, the cows and goats he had raised for years, were safe, protected from predators, and tucked into the pens. He double-checked the locks on every window and door before finally retiring to bed. The house creaked around them, the wind moaning like a distant animal, and Henry felt a shiver run down his spine, but he attributed it to the storm. Sleep, however, did not come easy. The sound of rain pounding on the roof made Henry's mind restless. He dreamed of shadows moving among the fields, of shapes passing behind the barn. But these were only dreams, or so he thought. By the time the household fell silent, the storm had reached its peak. Outside, the rain was horizontal, driven by gusts of wind so strong that the trees bent almost to the ground. And in that violent symphony of nature, someone moved. Henry never heard them. He never heard the careful footsteps in the mud, the quiet opening of the barn gate, or the low whispers exchanged under the storm's cover. The thief, or perhaps thieves, were methodical, deliberate, and silent as shadows. They worked quickly, moving through the paddocks and the pens, loading the animals onto a hidden vehicle or trailer. Every movement was planned. Every sound masked by the relentless rain and wind. Morning came not with relief, but with dread. The storm had passed, leaving the earth soaked, the ground muddy and treacherous. Henry stepped outside, expecting to hear the familiar calls of his livestock moos and bleats, the scratching of hooves on wood, but the sounds were gone. Panic gripped him as he rushed toward the barn. The gates were still standing, the fence intact, yet the animals were nowhere to be found. His stomach churned. At first, he thought maybe they had escaped, but the signs didn't add up. The fences were unbroken. There were no gaps large enough for the animals to slip through. The mud told a different story, a trail, faint but undeniable, leading away from his property. Someone had stolen them, moving silently in the night, leaving no other trace but the washed-out tracks in the muddy field. With a mix of fear, anger, and disbelief, Henry followed the trail. The path was difficult, muddy and slippery, but the determination to recover his animals drove him forward. Hours passed as he trudged through the wet fields, the remnants of the storm still lashing at him with occasional gusts of wind. The trail led to his neighbor's property, a man he had known for years but had never considered capable of such a crime. At first, Henry could not believe it. His neighbor was just another farmer, part of the same tight-knit rural community. But the signs were undeniable. Hoof prints leading directly into the neighbor's barn, disturbed soil, and the faint but unmistakable smell of livestock. He alerted the local sheriff, explaining everything the stolen animals, the tracks, the possible route, and the time frame. At first, the lawmen were skeptical. Livestock theft was rare in these parts, and the scale of the crime seemed almost impossible. But when Henry led them to the neighbor's property, the horror became clear. Behind the neighbor's barn, they found temporary pens hastily constructed, traces of mud matching Henry's farm, and the faint but unmistakable stains of blood. Forensic evidence suggested that the stolen animals had been killed and processed in secret, with the meat then sold to a butcher in the nearby town. The act was deliberate, cruel, and meticulously organized. Henry felt a mix of disbelief, anger, and helplessness. Years of work, of care and devotion had vanished overnight. His trust, too, had been destroyed. A neighbor someone he had waved to on quiet mornings, shared small conversation with, was capable of such calculated betrayal. The investigation revealed chilling details. The neighbor had killed the livestock efficiently, sold the meat, and attempted to erase all evidence of his crime. Everything he touched had been washed or covered, leaving almost no trace. The sheriff remarked on the methodical nature of the theft. It was like something out of a story, a crime planned with precision, using the cover of the storm to his advantage. For Henry, the aftermath was heavy. He rebuilt stronger fences, installed surveillance cameras, and fortified every structure on his property. Yet the sense of vulnerability remained. Every wind gust reminded him of that night. Every raindrop that hit the roof echoed with the memory of a storm that had masked someone moving silently among his fields, taking what he loved most. Even now, months later, Henry cannot forget the betrayal, the stolen livestock, or the fact that someone had been inside his life, invisible, unseen, yet terrifyingly close. He often walks his fields at night, flashlight in hand, ears straining for any sound beyond the natural, fearing that the same methodical thief could return at any moment. The remote countryside, with its serene mornings and peaceful nights, had become a place of suspense, a reminder that even in isolation, danger could arrive under the veil of rain and wind, and that betrayal could come from someone you trust most. After that first terrifying night, Daniel and his family tried to convince themselves it had been a random break-in, maybe a burglar taking advantage of the storm. But nothing about it felt random. Nothing about it made sense. The intruder had moved with purpose, avoided every creak, every camera, every obstacle. And the strange symbols scratched into the floors, they weren't something a common thief would do. The next morning, Daniel went outside to inspect the property. The ground was soaked and muddy from the storm, and he followed the tracks leading from the back door. To his horror, the footprints did not head toward the main road or any neighboring property. They led deeper into the woods. It was as if someone had come from the forest, struck with precision, and disappeared back into the trees without a trace. Daniel called the local sheriff's office immediately. The officers came quickly and inspected the house. They confirmed that no doors had been forced, no windows broken. Every entry point had been intact. "This is highly unusual," one of them said. Either the intruder had a key, or they knew the house intimately. Daniel realized with a sinking feeling that the intruder had studied the house. Perhaps they had watched the family for weeks, maybe months. And that thought terrified him the most. Someone was watching them, someone patient, calculating, and utterly fearless. Over the following days, Daniel noticed more signs. Small things at first. A chair slightly out of place, the baby monitor turned off, muddy footprints leading toward the edge of the woods. At night, he heard footsteps pacing just outside the house, slow and deliberate, sometimes circling the property. Once, he woke to the sound of whispering voices in the hallway, but when he turned on the lights, there was no one there. One evening, Daniel decided he had to know the truth. He followed the footprints in the early morning fog, carrying a flashlight, creeping toward the woods. The trail was faint but unmistakable. It led deeper into the forest, where the trees grew thick and the underbrush was almost impassable. The closer he went, the heavier the air felt. The forest seemed alive, whispering in voices that sounded almost human. Not suddenly, he stumbled upon something that made his blood run cold. Old, tattered symbols carved into tree trunks, the same shapes he had seen scratched into the floors of the house. Nearby, small offerings, stones, feathers, and bits of cloth had been left at the base of the trees. Daniel realized then that this was not just a burglar. This was someone involved in something much darker, a ritual or a tradition that he could barely comprehend. He returned home shaken and decided he could not stay any longer. They packed only the essentials and left the house for several days, staying at a hotel in town. During that time, Daniel contacted a local historian, someone familiar with the folklore of the region. The historian explained that the woods had long been rumored to harbor dark traditions, that the carvings and offerings were associated with protective or vengeful spirits in local legend. The historian's voice was grave. "You may have disturbed something that has been here for centuries, and it will not forgive easily." Daniel tried to dismiss it as superstition, but the evidence was undeniable. When they returned, the house felt different. The air was heavier, the shadows longer, and at night the whispering returned. One night, Daniel's daughter woke screaming, claiming she saw a tall, cloaked figure standing at the foot of her bed, staring at her with glowing eyes. The next morning, the footprints in the mud outside the window were still there, fresh, as if the figure had come and gone in seconds. Terrified but determined, Daniel contacted the police again. They increased patrols, but never found anyone. The woods were too thick, too remote. The sheriff's office finally admitted that they could not explain the intrusions. "We can monitor," they said, "but until we catch someone or something, you have to be careful." Since then, Daniel and his family fortified the house. Every door, every window, every crevice was sealed, alarms installed, cameras running constantly. Yet the nights remained restless. Shadows moved in the corners, whispering came through the cracks, and the forest outside seemed to watch, patient, waiting. Even now, months later, Daniel can hear the faint sound of footsteps on the wet leaves when the wind blows, and sometimes, late at night, he swears he sees a dark figure among the trees, just beyond the property line. The house at the edge of the woods is still standing, but the family knows the truth. They were never alone there. And whatever was watching, waiting, and marking the house is still out there, patient, and hungry. No one in the nearby town dares to enter those woods after dark. And Daniel has learned that in places too remote, some things are better left undisturbed. He tells the story now as a warning, because some nights, when the wind howls and the rain lashes against the roof, the figure returns and nothing feels safe again. It was late autumn, and the roads in the northern rural counties were already starting to feel empty and forgotten. Alex, a long-haul truck driver, had been traveling all day through the winding back roads of a remote American state. He had driven these routes many times before, but something about this night felt different. The air was thick with fog, and a light drizzle turned the asphalt into a reflective mirror, making every tree line and guardrail shimmer in the dim glow of his headlights. He had just left a small, nearly abandoned town when he noticed the first strange thing: a car behind him, far too close for comfort. At first, he thought it was just coincidence, a local driver, maybe lost, trying to keep up. But when he glanced in the rearview mirror, The vehicle's lights seemed to hover unnaturally, maintaining distance even as Alex slowed down on the wet curves of the road. The road twisted and turned, surrounded by dense forests on both sides, the kind that blocked out moonlight completely. Alex's radio was static-filled, the signals cutting in and out. Occasionally, he thought he heard whispers over the white noise, faint and almost human. He dismissed it, blaming fatigue, the storm, and his imagination. As he drove deeper into the forest, the car behind him kept following, never passing, never leaving, always hovering just out of reach. Every time Alex tried to shake it, the vehicle appeared again in the mirrors, reflecting the headlights but revealing no driver. The fog thickened, swirling in unnatural patterns around his truck. The trees seemed closer, leaning over the road, almost like they were watching him. Hours passed. The night was endless, the darkness pressing in from all sides. Alex's eyes burned from staring into the headlights, and his hands gripped the wheel until his knuckles were white. And then he saw a figure standing in the middle of the road. At first, he thought it was a hitchhiker, but as he slowed, the figure didn't move. No amount of shouting or honking made it budge. It just stood there motionless, looking at him. The rain intensified, blurring the windshield, and when he got close enough to see the figure clearly, his blood ran cold. It wasn't human. Its proportions were wrong. Too tall, too thin, almost skeletal. Its eyes reflected the truck's lights like small, glowing embers, and its head tilted unnaturally. As if studying him, Alex slammed the brakes and skidded to the side. Heart hammering, but the figure was gone. In the mirrors, though, the car behind him had stopped at the same spot. No driver could be seen, but the lights still there followed him when he tried to turn around. Terrified, Alex decided to take the next exit, hoping to find a gas station or another road. But the exit led only to a dirt path, narrow and lined with trees. The forest seemed to close in behind him as he drove. And that's when he noticed the signs on the trees' scratched letters and symbols, faintly glowing in the wet reflection of his headlights. He recognized none of them, but they carried a warning he could feel in his chest. Turn back, or stay forever. He sped through the dirt road, desperately searching for any sign of civilization. That's when he noticed movement in the wood shadows, darting between trees, moving faster than any human could. Branches snapped behind him, and in the corner of his vision, he saw shapes running parallel to the truck, keeping pace, but never touching the road. By now, Alex was in full panic. The car from earlier had vanished from the mirrors, but the feeling of being followed, of being watched, never left. Every curve in the road, every rise, seemed to hide more figures, sometimes on the road, sometimes in the tree line, always silent, always observing. Finally, he saw lights ahead, small flickers, like a distant settlement. Hope surged through him. He drove toward them, but as he got closer, the lights flickered out, leaving only darkness. When he braked, trying to make sense of what he was seeing, the truck in front of him appeared, his own truck, motionless, parked, but the engine running, lights on, and inside. He could swear he saw his own terrified face staring back at him. That panic turned to terror. He hit the accelerator, driving as fast as he could down the wet road, until suddenly the forest ended. He was on a main highway. The lights of a town appeared in the distance. He slowed, heart racing, and realized something horrifying. His dash camera had captured nothing from the previous hours. No fog, no forest, no shadowy figures, no symbols, just the empty road and his own truck driving alone. He stopped at a gas station, trembling, buying a coffee he couldn't drink. The attendant, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, asked if he had been driving through the back roads. When Alex described the night, the fog, the figures, the symbols, the man's face went pale. "You're lucky," he said quietly. Many people go down that stretch and don't come back the same. Some say the forest keeps people, collects them. Others say it doesn't let anyone leave until it's done with them. You saw it, and it let you go. Alex left that town as soon as he could, never returning to that road. But even months later, whenever he drives at night, the memory comes back. The glowing eyes, the skeletal figure, the mirrored truck, the whispering fog. And he knows, deep in his gut, that the forest is still out there, waiting for the next driver to wander too far from the safety of the main roads. Because in those back roads, in that remote state, the road never forgets, and it never forgives. In a remote industrial town in the Midwest, there stood an abandoned factory. It had been closed for decades, its walls rusted, windows shattered, and the surrounding yard overgrown with weeds. The locals avoided it, saying strange things happened, their lights flickering at night, noises like machines running, and shadows moving inside despite the emptiness. No one dared enter, except a group of 4 friends looking for adventure. The group consisted of Mike, Sarah, Jason, and Emily, college students fascinated by urban exploration. They had heard rumors about the factory and wanted to document it for their video channel. On a cold, rainy evening, they drove to the site. The sky was dark. The wind howled through the broken windows, and the air smelled of rust and decay. The moment they stepped inside, the temperature dropped sharply. Their flashlights barely penetrated the darkness. The factory smelled of oil and dust, with a metallic tang of rust everywhere. Old machinery loomed in the shadows, some still partially intact, others twisted and broken. The floor creaked beneath their feet, as if the building itself was a live dot at first. They explored cautiously, laughing nervously, filming everything. But soon, strange things began to happen. A machine they were filming suddenly switched on, making a grinding noise that echoed through the massive halls. Nothing moved when they approached. Doors that had been shut slammed on their own. Footsteps echoed in rooms they had already passed through. Emily, the most sensitive of the group, felt eyes watching her. Shadows seemed to flicker just beyond the beam of her flashlight. When she called out, no one answered, except a faint whisper that sounded like her own name. They moved deeper into the factory, discovering a stairwell leading underground. At the bottom was a labyrinth of tunnels and small rooms, none of which were on the old factory plans they had seen online. The air grew colder, the smell of decay stronger. Walls were covered in strange symbols, painted in a dark, sticky substance. Old notes and scraps of paper were scattered on the floor, warning in half-legible handwriting, "Do not wake them. They are hungry." As they ventured further, the lights from their flashlights flickered and went out entirely. Total darkness enveloped them. Panic set in. The sound of dragging chains echoed from the far end of the tunnel. Jason tried to turn on his phone's flashlight, but the battery died instantly. A shadow moved past them, faster than any human could. They ran, trying to retrace their steps, but the tunnels seemed to shift. Every hallway they had passed before now led to dead ends or spiraled deeper into darkness. Mike swore he saw a figure standing at the end of a corridor, motionless, yet impossibly tall. Its head tilted unnaturally. Then the whispers began, voices overlapping, speaking in a language none of them understood. The shadows in the corners of their eyes grew larger, forming shapes that seemed almost human, but wrong, distorted. Something was following them, moving silently, waiting for them to separate. Hours passed, or maybe minutes, they couldn't tell. Time seemed distorted underground. Exhausted and terrified, they finally found a way back to the main floor. But the factory had changed. The exit they had entered was blocked by debris that hadn't been there before. A low, guttural growl echoed from behind the machine, and they saw a pair of glowing eyes staring at them. They climbed out through a broken window, soaked from the rain outside, gasping for air. They didn't stop running until they reached their car. When they looked back, the factory seemed normal. Again, broken windows, rusted walls, empty yard. No lights, no shadows, nothing. But the memory of what they had seen was burned into their minds. They never returned. Videos they had taken were corrupted, showing only static and brief flashes of figures they didn't recognize. The locals warned them, the factory is alive in some way, feeding off curiosity, dragging people inside, and sometimes never letting them go. Even now, years later, Mike can't drive past that part of town. Sarah still hears whispers in her apartment when the wind howls. Jason refuses to talk about it. Emily has nightmares of the tunnels, the eyes, and the moving shadows. And the factory remains, waiting, patient, hungry, for the next group who dares to enter.